I think I don't really need to introduce the panel members. I think but I'll maybe leave you to introduce yourself to the extent that you feel is needed to as we go on. The panel topic is investing in longevity. We've heard from several presenters, and not least Aubrey yesterday, about what really looks like it could be a tsunami of funding going into this area over the next few years. Potentially a very positive story for the fight against aging. And the very simple question that I want to ask the panelists at first, basically, what could go wrong? What are the main obstacles, risks, potential problems that you foresee that could derail this positive narrative and which we therefore, as a community, need to guard against? I'll stop.
Thank you. My name is Elena Milova. I'm an outreach director of Life Extension Advocacy Foundation, which is a charity supporting fundamental research on aging and also educating the public about the promise of rejuvenation therapies. So what can go wrong? There are many things that go wrong right now. Main thing that is wrong is lack of funding for basic science, basic studies on aging. And here's why it is a problem. It turns out that in order to get more biotech startups enter the field, and in order to get them supported by the investors, and in order for them to be able to run clinical trials and so on and so forth, you first have to accumulate quite a lot of knowledge about all sorts of mechanisms of aging and about the potential interventions that can potentially work in mammals, let's say, and only then it can open the door to actually developing a treatment for people. And right now the situation is not very good because of the lack of public support and public demand for all these technologies. The government is mostly allocating funding to study age-related diseases, single age-related diseases, and the amount that is allocated to study the mechanisms of aging is 10 times smaller, which basically means that we may know quite a lot about all kind of symptoms related to age-related diseases, but we may not know enough about the mechanism of aging to promote the development of biotech startups and so on and so forth. So that's one of the biggest problems as of now, I would say.
So in a way, the lack of governmental funding is creating a lack of the fundamental research, which would be the necessary basis for private sector funding to be able to...
So yes, you see the process of developing a new treatment or a new therapy is a quite difficult one, and you always have this funnel of studies, right? You begin with like 1 million studies, then you filter them out, you only leave the ones that give you the best results, and by the time when it comes to clinical trials, there are maybe 1 or 2 or 3 approaches that prove to be more or less viable to affect the mechanisms of aging, which is why you first really have to accumulate this enormous amount of knowledge. And to do that, you basically have to run more studies.
Okay, quick introduction to myself, Alexandra Bause, founding partner at Apollo Ventures. We are investing in and also creating new companies, biotech startups that are focused on longevity therapeutics. My background is in pharmacy, but I did my PhD in the molecular mechanisms of aging, specifically mitochondrial metabolism and how it relates to aging. And now with Apollo, we are actually trying to close the gap between the fundamental research and the translational research to really bring new promising projects into the clinic. And what I see as another challenge, obviously I agree that we need to redirect a lot of the basic research funding to basic science projects in aging. But what also is another risk is once these are translated into a later stage, what I'm concerned with is that there is a lot of hype, especially in the United States, where projects are being oversold for for their promise in improving healthy longevity, whereas the basic science is not as strong yet. And this seems to currently be creating a bubble in terms of longevity-focused investments, especially in the Bay Area, which could backfire. So we need to make sure that the investments that are going into the field are being really well evaluated towards the projects that are really going to bring a meaningful difference versus those that are just being sold as the quackery that we saw in the previous slide. And making this difference is going to require a lot of scientific diligence where the investments go to.
So the risk of a longevity bubble that will then burst.
If the wrong projects are being overfunded.
Right. Okay. Thanks.
Yeah, Michael Greve, founder of the Forever Healthy Foundation and also owner of Kizu Technology Ventures. As part of our Forever Healthy strategy, we are funding and helping startups in the rejuvenation biotech scene get started. Yeah, I totally agree. What we see right now is we see a rising interest and investors become aware of the huge potential, which is easy to do a napkin calculation. Is like, okay, we have like 7 billion people on the planet. Let's say take those in the Western world and those about 35, so that makes 2 billion people. And what would you spend on staying healthy indefinitely or not getting cancer, all that crap? Maybe it's 10,000 euros a year. So make that calculation, that's $20 trillion a year industry. So that's probably the biggest industry we've ever seen on the planet. It's a rough calculation, it's easy to make. Investors are, the interest is raising. But what's happening right now, the few investors that are there, they're gobbling up the research that has been accumulated over the last 10 years when there was no funding at all. So this is going to end soon. And then all the vetted projects that are out there are funded. And then exactly what you said is going to happen. Money is floating in, no real projects is there, prices will go up, credibility will go down. And we probably going to see a backlash anyhow. I don't know if we have much influence on that one, what happens in Silicon Valley. But I think what we can do is like develop the basic science. We should not forget we need the basic science. And this is why we fund the projects with the Sense Foundation, for example. Because for every, unlike IT or other industries, in this industry, you need one invention is one startup. So it's not like in the internet, you had like the basic protocols, a web server, a browser, the transport protocol, and you could build virtually anything on top of that. It's not the same. So tech investors might get that wrong. So we can build hundreds of biotech companies. No, that's not right. You need a research result, a specific type of research. You can turn that into a company. For the next company, you need the next research result. So if we don't have basic research, we're not going to have companies.
So would it be fair to say then that we should maybe have a somewhat skeptical attitude towards this idea that there's going to be a huge amount of funding going into longevity, which will actually help us to cure aging?
Oh no, I don't think so. But the funding is going to come. Pretty much sure of that. It's inevitable. The question is how much result are we going to see of that first influx of money? This is also why we're running this Undoing Aging conference to get the community together to support those people. We also want to encourage scientists to become founders, because you're building companies, and it would be really helpful if scientists understand that well. It's as Anastasia said, that scientists are really remote from the actual application of their works. That they do their work just for science, but it's about helping people to stay healthy. So you have to make the step forward and say, okay, it's not only about like breaking crosslinks in the petri dish, but you have to do it in humans to have an actual impact. But if your scientific curiosity ends at, okay, I did it in a petri dish, and then maybe I did it in a mice, and that, I don't know, secures me more funding, that's not enough. So we need people that say, okay, this has implications for humans, and it's my obligation as a scientist who is able to do this in petri dish, in mice, it's my moral obligation to help to do this in humans.
Okay, so more scientists actually getting involved in pursuing projects that are relevant for humans. Elena, you were putting quite a lot of emphasis in your presentation on the need for government funding in order to fund the basic research, and in the need in particular for outreach to the public in order to motivate governments. How would you say that's going?
Pretty bad so far. Well, you see, you really need a critical amount of activists working in a specific country in order to progress. For instance, my pretty successful experience was working with Daria Halturina, who was just giving a talk here about her current project to lobby in the WHO the acceptance of aging as a disease. So we were working in Russia, and no matter how many times we were calling other activists to join us, for instance, to go in a civic chamber in order to discuss a specific law or specific regulation that will ease actually the life of our researchers, it was very hard to do. So I think it's pretty much dependent on how mature our community is indeed, because you just really need these hands, these heads, to come and to actually tell the officials what will be the best way to develop the industry in a specific country. I think it's much better now on the international level, once again, mostly thanks to the activities of Daria Halturina and a group of researchers and activists who are helping her. But my overall impression is that we should be able to do much, much more. But on this regard, I also have one more note. You see, when we are speaking about educating the public, we also should understand that, for instance, the investors community has all the same needs to be properly educated on the topic. Because you can solve the problem of quackery in two ways, actually. One of them is to have more scientists on board who will be consulting the investors in order to make better decisions regarding certain startups. But the other one is to help the investors and educate the investors directly by providing them with an adequate amount of scientific information, maybe popularized scientific information, making the introduction to the topic, like something that I'm actually doing with LEAF, because this is one of my responsibilities, to organize meetings with people who might potentially become investors, and then come to them and just properly explain the topics, give them an introductory talk or something like that, just to protect them from making mistakes, from taking people who are not doing serious science, and to develop their sympathy for people who are doing great science. Okay.
Thanks, Alexandra. Is that something that you think could actually help prevent a sort of unhelpful bubble if we have more information actually directed at the investor community on what is sound and what is not sound?
I think it could prevent some wrong decisions, but there's always some scientists or some entrepreneurs that will be able to sell an interesting, potentially semi-scientific story to investors that will not be accessible to those educational efforts.
One more comment regarding that. You see, it's unavoidable to have a scientific advisor on board at a time when you're making a decision. But when you are actually interacting with people who are considering for themselves to become investors into longevity startups, you can also pass to them this sort of feeling that they should be really mission-driven. Right, so the decision making can be poor because they are lacking knowledge, but it can also be poor if they don't really understand their role in this field in general, in their role and the transformation that can come out of good decisions and the lack of transformation that can come out of bad decisions, because we cannot really close our eyes and not to look at the fact that we have a great population aging, and we have a very short period of time when we will be still able, with a relatively stable economy, to develop all these things. So when we are interacting with people considering to become investors, we are also trying to not just to explain aging, right? Mechanisms of aging, hallmarks of aging, and their role in developing age-related diseases, and why it's much more beneficial to address these mechanisms. We are also trying to explain to them that they can help humanity to achieve a great transformation, maybe the best one in the history of humanity, making so many people free from a huge amount of suffering, free from age-related diseases, and so on and so forth. And some of them are susceptible, definitely susceptible to this idea, because it's not just money that many people want, it's also to feel that they are doing a good thing. So we definitely can work on that.
And I think it's almost inevitable that we get this bubble, and the bubble is going to burst. I mean, I've been through that in the internet, and that really became, it was, and now we are in the investing phase. If we go to the IPO phase, and everybody understood, oh, this is the potential of the industry. Everybody wants to buy the stock. So this is going to be a huge gold rush on the stock market in there, inflated prices all over the place, and then the backlash, because it's not like technology investment where you invest over time and your company gets more valuable as much as your investment in biotech. It's like you go up like this, and then you have a failed phase 3 trial, and your value goes down to zero in an instant after spending $200, $300 million. And there's going to be a lot of potential for disappointment. And everybody who is investing in that must be aware that's a real long-term thing. It's about helping humanity and making a very healthy profit, but it's going to take a long time. So, I mean, we expect to stay 10, 15, 20 years with the startups that we're in right now. But we can prepare for this backlash. We know that it will come, and we should be not distracted by the backlash that's inevitably going to happen. We need the basic science. It's a good thing to do that. The good investors will prevail. It will take time. It will take 10, 15 years if we are really serious about doing this before you have the real profits, before your products work. So it takes the time, but we better start now than in 10 years, because then in 15 years we have it, and if you start in 10 years, it will take another 10 years from there on.
What would you say is the main thing that is preventing more scientists from exploiting their research, making sure that it's more directly relevant for humans?
I think it requires just education, a shift of mindset. It's about their surrounding. This is why the Undoing Aging conference, we do it like a tech conference, not like a science conference. We cherish scientists. We try to show them. We had a lot of startups there on that scientific conference. Like more than a third of the speakers were CEOs of their startup companies, showing, oh, it can be done. I'm a scientist. I'm running a company. It's not that scary to do that. It's really rewarding. And you get a lot. By the way, you help humanity. You get a lot of resources if you have investors, because can you really focus on your science? So this is what we try a little bit to turn it more in the tech investing scene, and to show scientists that it's really exciting to do something about it outside the petri dish.
I can comment on that as well. I think there's one key thing that prevents scientists from doing translational work, which is their incentives through publishing. So currently, academic scientists are incentivized by publishing in high-profile journals, and that's kind of how they keep their jobs and keep their funding secured. But that kind of contradicts the incentives that you have if you want to commercialize something, because then you don't want to publish immediately. You want to develop intellectual property that's secured and protected, and at some point then get a proof of concept, which is not necessarily what you get in academia right away. You get nice data on basic science, but not directly proof of concept of the meaningfulness of your findings in a real world evidence. So that's one thing, so misaligned incentives. The other thing is that a lot of scientists just really enjoy basic science, and that's what they're good at, and that's what they want to do all their lives, and they just enjoy being curious and finding out new things about how nature works. And then it's really important to provide the resources, and that's what a lot of the investment firms also do, provide the resources to build startups and help the scientists to translate their research, why the scientists can keep doing what they love to do, and not necessarily have to get out of their comfort zone.
So in a way, it's about building partnerships between the scientists and people for whom investment is more part of their comfort zone so that they can complement each other?
Yeah, definitely build a bridge between the scientific community and the biopharma business community and kind of translate the findings and make sure that they are commercially viable.
Elena?
Well, I will say the same thing, but in a different field. In fact, we will greatly benefit if scientists will be more involved into our discussion of regulations, of laws, of specific projects within the government, because so far we're also lacking a little bit this high qualified support from them, and that makes our work as advocates much harder. Because what we have to learn for months and months and months, a scientist can already know, have on the tips of his fingers. And also, it's very valuable when you have someone on board who has a very large background and who understands the situations on a systemic way and can really provide his expertise when a final decision on a specific law or regulation is taken. And that concerns everything. For instance, even if you think about introducing something into clinical practice, or if you think about technology transfer into a specific country, because we all know that technology will be first produced somewhere and then will be distributed from this country to other countries, and that takes time, and time is very important for everyone in this room and other people in this city and on this planet. So you really would like to see this process accelerated as much as possible. And one of the ways to do that is, again, through collaboration with experts of all fields when it comes to like every part of the process of first developing the therapy, but also implementing it.
So I would like to hear from one of the scientists in the audience. What do you think would motivate you or people, other people within the scientific community to get more proactive in exploiting your results, in working with regulators to create a more benign regulatory environment, and so on?
I think more generally I would like to say that I think there is a bit too much emphasis on one model. Create general awareness amongst the public, they will exercise pressure on the politicians, then the government will provide more funding for basic research, then there will be spin-offs, and then there will be products. Okay, there's nothing wrong with that, but it's very unidimensional, and there are many parallel options that I think are worth pursuing. For instance, you can, instead of raising awareness amongst the general public, you can lobby very specifically critical people in politics or in science, key opinion leaders. Instead of expecting all the funding to come from the government, you can get funding from the general public, you can get funding sometimes from VCs. There are some biotech companies that have done amazing basic research with VC funding. It's not always possible, but sometimes it's possible. There are very wealthy donors like the Bill Gates Foundation. There are examples of private individuals, high net worth, who are willing to commit part of the money to research. So I think that we have to get away from this idea that there's this one pathway and one trajectory. I think you have to work in parallel, use all the options. The other thing is there is no specific funding or too little for aging. Okay, I would agree, but you also said that many people are working on age-related diseases. So as a scientist, then you have to be creative, and your Alzheimer project gets submitted as an Alzheimer project. That's the label on it, but underlying, it's actually an aging project. But you're studying the aging process via the Alzheimer's disease. So, you know, I think everyone has to be a little bit creative instead of sitting here and whining about all the things that can go wrong and do go wrong. Look at the glass that's half full and, you know, try to top it up creatively with some things that are completely feasible and that are within reach, and that individual scientists, again, there are scientists who want to stay in the lab. Okay, leave them in the lab. There are other ones that you would rather found companies. Okay, support them to found companies. I mean, diversity is an asset. You know, don't push everyone into a single mold. That's never going to work.
Okay, I'd like to give the panel the opportunity to respond to that. Maybe start with Michael and go.
Yeah, question, so I don't know to respond.
I agree with you, but when you were actually providing this comment, you said one thing that kind of scratched me right away. You said, you don't have to persuade the general public and then you have to draw funds from the general public. You know, there is a little bit of controversy here. So my point is, I don't mean that we need to go only this direction. I just mean that going this direction is probably the most important thing right now, because whatever you do, you educate the public. Would it be a public consisting of investors? Will it be the public consisting of officials? Will it be the public consisting of just people who would like to support research on aging? Anyways, we are going through a process of education before we even can get anywhere. As Lifespan.io is actually a crowdfunding platform to support research directly, to organize, to sort of democratize research, right? To allow people who are interested in getting there faster to be able to support the researchers directly. I totally understand your point of view. And this is exactly why we first founded this platform, to provide an alternative while we are waiting for the government, to turn its attention to the need to allocate more funds into longevity research. We're doing it ourselves, because we have very few other options. To get to any sort of wealthy person, you first have to develop as an organization to become credible enough to be then allowed to even talk to this person, you know? So it's unavoidable. First we develop the community, then we have at least some resources for advocacy activities, then we become credible, then we get access to these wealthy individuals you are speaking about. Because if you are a person from nowhere, believe me, Bill Gates will not deal with you. So anyways, we needed this stage of advocacy and education of the public in order to get somewhere. But of course, I agree with you that it doesn't really have to be the only direction of our activities.
Alexandra, I mean, what would you, from your perspective, would be the one key thing that would help to speed up progress in this field?
I think the final end consumer, which is eventually us, but first of all, it would be the payers and the pharma companies. They need to show interest in commercializing these therapies. And that's kind of where we are right now. We're kind of building the bridge between basic science and the actual commercialization. And we need to convince that big pharma wants to put their funding into these companies as well. Because only then can we make sure that we can actually reach a wider patient base, basically.
Maybe a controversial question then. Isn't there an extent to which pharma has a business interest in people being sick?
Well, if they can reach a much wider market by preventing disease, that could actually be a better business case for them as well.
Yes, actually, me too. I believe that natural competition will actually lead to the increased quality of the products of the market and so on and so forth. Actually, I wanted to bring in one more topic because I believe it's very important. Right now, so it seems the only way for the rejuvenation companies to develop new therapies is to go through the traditional way by picking up some sort of indication first, like Alzheimer's or osteoarthritis or macular degeneration and so on and so forth, then test their treatment to be able to cure this disease or ameliorate it, then pick up the next indication and the next indication and the next indication, and then at some point, most possibly, the regulatory bodies will agree to just use these particular treatments for all people just to slow down aging. But this scenario is possible because it was already done by certain companies producing therapies against cancer. So they tested for it for one type, for second type, for third type, and then FDA just told them, okay, guys, whatever. When you see this particular set of biomarkers in people, you can use this treatment, that's okay. So the treatments that are addressing the mechanisms of aging can take the same route. But here is a problem. You see, when a company has to test it repeatedly for one indication, for next indication, for the next indication, and so on, time is running out for certain people, right? So having a direct route, which means to be able to test it to slow down aging, will be beneficial, more beneficial for the users, for the clients, for people who are going to take it to slow down aging. But it's very difficult to achieve that because so far aging is not recognized as a disease, which is why I believe the projects like the one by Daria Khalturin and her colleagues is so important, lobbying the WHO and related regulatory bodies in order to ease the life of people developing rejuvenation startups in long term. So I would actually ask the opinion of my colleagues on this matter.
I think along with that, one of the most important things that we need to really tackle in order to develop longevity therapeutics is identify the right biomarkers. Because without those biomarkers, we cannot run a clinical trial. And so and without the biomarkers, we can't actually establish a certain indication. So I think Daria mentioned that they need to define what are the actual criteria for the indication of aging. And these will be, and I think there were some startups that are working on developing diagnostics and biomarkers that we need to ameliorate or affect with our therapeutics, and only then can we actually bring a longevity therapeutic to market. Until these biomarkers are not established, we will have to go disease by disease. And it's the same case as it was for Keytruda, for the immuno-oncology drug that you're talking about. They needed that biomarker, the PD-L1 expression, in those cancer samples and the cancer biopsies to determine the patient population that they can use their drug on. And that's going to be the same case for the aging biomarker diagnostics.
And I think we have to be a bit creative here as well, because we always talk about aging, the big thing, and the aging biomarkers. I think we're going to have a hard time to define the aging biomarkers. And I think the much easier way is if we go along the molecular and cellular repair approach. If we measure the specific cellular damage and then repair that damage, and we have a single biomarker for that damage, we would be a big step further. There would be a big advance. For example, right now we are not able to reliably and easily measure senescent cells in humans. So we don't need a big biomarker telling us a biological age with a huge variation in there. It would be great if we could just measure senescent cells, apply the treatment, and then say, okay, less senescent cells, treatment's working. And if we could do this for crosslinks and for all the other individual damages or hallmarks of aging things, that's going to be a real issue. Whether that defines biological age or not remains to be seen. So far, I haven't seen a single biomarker or a big set of biomarkers that define aging as a whole that you can, for example, lower with a senolytic treatment. That's, I think, it's not going to happen for a long time.
I agree with the need for those very quick to assess biomarkers, but eventually what needs to happen is that these have to be established to have a meaningful impact on clinical outcomes. So even if you're removing senescent cells, you also have to show that this removal of senescent cells actually results in extended health span. And there will be some functional markers that I think there have been some efforts to determine these functional markers to show that these clinically easy to assess biomarkers can also predict a health benefit.
Yes, actually, I agree. I think it will be a mix of both approaches. Yeah, and actually, my colleague Javier Norris, who is the leader of the project Longevity Investors Network, where we are trying to support biotech startups by organizing pitch sessions with the investors. He is saying that it's absolutely critical to have this sort of biomarkers because, first of all, it will allow to make studies shorter, and for the investors, it's very important to operate on a smaller time scale because this will allow them to reduce the risks and also to be able to find more partners, I mean to form a group of investors who are going to support a specific company, while a longer period of time always means a bigger risk for them and it makes them less likely to take part into supporting a specific rejuvenation biotechnology startup.